Hello everyone. As mentioned in the previous upload, I'm bringing you a recommended reading video today. I haven't made one of these videos for a little while. They tend not to be as popular as my more substantive videos looking at individual bits of kit and so forth and recreations, but I do like to make them from time to time to bring forward titles which I've found useful and found interesting, which may be of interest to viewers. And obviously if only a few people watch, if a few of those go away and go, well, that might have been interesting, that might be of interest to me, and I'll go and pick one up, and that's fantastic. That's the whole purpose of these videos. What we're looking at is British military uniforms from Contemporary Pictures, and hopefully I'm angling this so there's not too much glare directly into the camera. This is a slightly battered copy, slightly worn copy, which I picked up for a couple of pounds at a second-hand shop in Gromont on a recent trip to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which was very nice for my wife's birthday. Actually, I'm a very lucky man in that we have a shared interest there, and that was her chosen day out this year for her birthday. But as I say, as part of that, we went into the cooperative there, the old cooperative building, part of which has been given over to a second-hand shop which sells all sorts of bits and pieces, and this was front and centre on the bookshelf, so I picked it up. It's it's a title I've been aware of for a while and saw it at a very good price there, even though it is obviously a slightly battered copy. It still very much serves the purpose as a good reference book, and we're going to have a look at this, have a flick through it now, and look at exactly what's covered. And as I say, maybe it will be of interest to you. So here we have it, British Military Uniforms from Contemporary Pictures by W.Y. Carman. And as you can see, this is a rather beaten up copy, as already mentioned, but it's nevertheless a perfectly serviceable reference book. We have a flick through here. One of the first illustrations I'll share with you is this rather excellent reproduction of this illustration of the Scots Fusilier Guards from 1854, March of 1854, basically on their way to the Crimea, or just about to depart for the Crimea. Rather splendid illustration there. And the pictures in this are generally reproduced very well from the original sources. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but generally speaking, they're very well reproduced. And we'll just look through to the contents here to give you an idea of what's covered in this. So you do start the Tudor era, which is not an era I'm particularly interested in from a military point of view, from a military history and uniform and so forth point of view. There was a quasi-uniform clothing in use at that time, which is interesting in of itself, but it's not my particular area of interest. My interest mainly kicks in the 1600s, which is the sort of the Stuarts in this is the part one, obviously, and then you've got the later part of the Restoration there into the early 1700s, and then you carry on through to the Victorian era, and from 1901 to modern times, which encompasses a huge amount of ground, of course, but you've got a lot of the book covering a lot of detail of the era prior to the Victorian period. So that is quite interesting in of itself, that era, those earlier eras are covered in a lot of detail. And we'll just have a quick flick through here to have a look at some of the illustrations which are reproduced. You can see here we have a musketeer, or probably an arquebusier at the time, and an officer of the army of Henry VIII around that era. And the illustrations on these plates are sort of mixed up a little bit in terms of the eras covered, but this is that very much earlier era, sort of 1500s, which is not really my area of interest, as I say, but it does show the military uniforms and so forth in the run-up to the English Civil War, which is the era I'm more interested in. And then we're moving into the early 1600s here, and the typical sort of views of pikemen and musketeers of that period, illustrations which are commonly reproduced because there are fairly few, relatively limited numbers of illustrations from this period, originating in the period. And then obviously we have some paintings and so forth reproduced here as well to show the sort of clothing worn by officers and so forth, and in this case Charles I himself on the left there, as you can see. Carry on flicking through. There are a few more illustrations here showing the Army of the Restoration, fairly early on. And of course, it's during the English Civil War that a true standing army first develops in the new model, and then that's perpetuated by the English Army of the Restoration, and then on through to the British Army, of course. I won't flick through every illustration in here, but you get the idea. You've got these illustrations, and the text often refers directly to them and talks in more detail about the era, the state of the army at the time, the regiments which were raised, and the clothing that was used by both cavalry and the foot, the infantry, of course. So you see we've got cavalry and dragoons here shown in period illustrations, which are then discussed in greater detail in the text. If we have a look here, we have some more colour illustrations reproduced here, and we've moved on. Well, this is from 1808, this illustration here, but we're actually in the text still back in the 1600s, talking about infantry, the uniform of the later Restoration period, or the end of the 17th century. And then you have music as well, of course, is noted here, deals with a little bit of that too. And then William III to Queen Anne, 1688 to 1714, so we're moving into that early 18th century period. And again, starting with cavalry here. So the text, as I say, ties in with this progressive look through the uniform and development of clothing and so forth through the periods covered. But the illustrations are sort of scattered a little bit more widely throughout the book, because obviously they make use of these sections of higher quality paper. The plates are sort of segregated off throughout the book, as you would expect, reference books of this period. You can see these again reproduced here. There are some interesting illustrations in here that I hadn't seen previously, in spite of having sort of an interest in contemporary illustrations, particularly from the Napoleonic era, showing uniform and so forth of that time. Some of the examples which are reproduced in here, I've not seen reproduced even online or anywhere else for that matter in books I've had previously. So from that point of view alone, quite a decent reference book to pick up in that regard. This is quite a famous illustration here that has been reproduced many times, but I say reproduced again here. And then we'll just flick through to Victorian era here. As I say, there's a large amount of material in the middle there, but I don't want to spend too long just flicking through pages of illustrations. But again, we have the cavalry, and that's broken down into different types of cavalry, and then the infantry as well, dealing with the sort of development of clothing and so forth in there. And then one thing I was interested to show was the later sections of the book. So we're moving here onto here to see sort of the home service uniform and so on in use in the very late Victorian era, and then through into the early 1900s, of course. And then it does cover through modern times. You can see we actually flick back with some of the illustrations here. We have an illustration of the troops during the Indian Mutiny here, so it does jump around a little bit in the way that the illustrations are presented. Really lovely example here of soldiers and officers' uniform from the Great War era, and a nicely reproduced painting at the top there as well, as you can see. And it does go right the way through, and it covers a little bit of sort of more modern uniform here. You can see 1949 pattern battle dress there, and blues uniform at the top, which is sort of where this really cuts off in terms of the uniforms illustrated. So you don't see anything of camouflage clothing or combat clothing covered in this, but you do see the battle dress uniform in the sort of very late stages of this book, so the later part of this book. It's basically where it gets up to, which is fairly contemporary to when the book was produced, of course. So that's a quick flick through, just to show you some of the illustrations and so forth reproduced in here. And I'd say not taking you through the text in any great detail, but just had a flick through. As I say, I found some illustrations and some paintings and so forth reproduced in here that I wasn't aware of. And for the price, I think it's worth picking up. Obviously, it's quite an old reference book now, somewhat out of date, I guess you could say, but a lot of the information presented within is still useful and still relevant if you're interested in the development of British military uniforms during the very sort of wide time period covered by the book. So hopefully having a quick flick through has been of some use to those who might find this book interesting. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. I say I don't make these recommended reading videos very often, and obviously they aren't as popular as my other uploads, but hopefully those who have watched have found it interesting and informative as to whether this would be something that would be of interest to you. A lot of the topics covered in the book sit outside the area I generally cover on the channel. Obviously there's mainly focused on the 20th century in the kit and the uniform and so forth that I cover on the channel, but I have a great interest in the Victorian era and the 18th century as a period of obviously great colonial expansion for the British, becoming a world power during that period, from relative obscurity in the 17th century, obviously sort of spurred on by the the English Civil War, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, to use another term there, of course, and from there on is of great interest to me. I'm less interested in sort of the Tudor medieval period from a military perspective, but certainly from the mid-17th century onwards is of great interest to me. So for me, this book covers a lot of ground I'm interested in, and hopefully some of you watching will have found this interesting and will want to go and pick up a copy. They can be had second-hand for not a great deal. You could find them very cheaply in a shop, as I did, for a couple of pounds. I think they are available online for around £10, £15, something like that, in slightly better condition than the copy I've picked up, but certainly not expensive. So I hope you found it interesting. As I say, if you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch with me but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.